All right, so the goal was to work with Miniproject3 using ChatGPT. There again, I don't consider using ChatGPT cheating as long as you understand the code. And when I ask you about the code, you can explain it. And if you don't know how to explain it, well, first of all, ask ChatGPT to explain it for you, right? And if it's using silly advanced code, all you have to do is say, I'm a Python beginner. Can you write it in code I would understand? And it will rewrite it for you in code that you can understand. So if it's doing some weird 4x and x, blah, 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 lambda, delta stuff, just say, I'm a beginner. I don't understand that. And it will change it. I actually was showing other students how to do that the other day. Obviously, you should know how to code these, but if you want to get something up and running and get yourself a template, you can't just dump in my mini project and send it to it and say, do that for me. Like that will not work. I can tell you right now, it just won't work. Because it's going to say initial comments with your name, blah, blah, blah. It doesn't know the format that we use, right? It doesn't know that kind of stuff. And I purposely build it that way.
You have to give it all the context.
Exactly. So for this one, we're going to use Flask, and we want to set up a proper folder structure using this tutorial. For us, that's pretty simple in PyCharm. We're just going to create a new project, and we're going to tell it it's Flask. And up here in the title, let's go ahead and just call this ChatGPT demo. Okay, so we're going to hit create. You guys are welcome to do this with your Django stuff while you're doing it too, right? We're just doing Flask for now until we cover all the Django stuff. And so speaking of ChatGPT, if you guys don't have access to that already, you go out to chat.openapi or openai.com. You create yourself an account, use your Google ID, whatever you want, and you will get access to ChatGPT 3.5. If you pay for it, you can go up to ChatGPT 4. The difference between 3.5 and 4 is 3.5 is written on something that went up to like 2018, something like that. And it is extremely fast, right? It's a really fast model, but it's got old data. It also lies like a 2-year-old if it doesn't know the answer, right? So just be aware of that. Like it will straight lie to you on something. Okay. So it's not the end all be all. 4 has more advanced reasoning with it. So it explains a little better. It is a little bit slower, but it's a lot more capable. It's what, $20 a month if you want to go for the full version, something like that. You still are capped at 50 messages every 3 hours, even though when you're paid for that one, you get 50 messages every 3 hours. And then you have access to things like plugins and a bunch of this other stuff. And these plugins are getting really, really awesome in what they do. So the main one that would be fun is this advanced data analysis. This will allow you to analyze code and then come back and figure out what's wrong and a bunch of other stuff. I used this one the other day to do very advanced statistics in my PhD program, and it worked fantastic for helping me figure out what was what and where I needed and where I was wrong in my calculations. The plugins that I've used in here, if you are in a research class, so for example, you're in research methods or capstone, you guys got to write a paper. You go out to the library, you find all your resources and stuff you want. There is a plugin called Scholar AI that's in here. Again, you can use the free version of it, or you can use the paid for version. What it will do is go out and actually find you articles for those type of papers, and then pull them in, and then you can ask questions about the articles. You can interact with the document to get stuff out. And there's a ton of different plugins available. What's really slick, the only problem with that is it will only find open source databases. So what I did was I would go out and grab my PDF documents. I had ChatGPT help me write a Flask project that just hosted web PDFs for me. Super simple. And then I upload my PDF to my own web server, hit go, and then I can point ChatGPT back to my files that I hosted, right? It can only access open source stuff. So I just created a quick website that hosted the PDFs of the documents I wanted to trace. Then it will read it in and it will analyze everything for you. What's really slick about it is you can get the highlights of, say, 40 articles you got to have for your stuff. Then you can start putting your papers together. You can then backfeed your paper at the end through Scholar AI and say, what's missing? What should I change? What's the tone? It will help you fix all of that. So it's like having a librarian assistant built right in for you. It's really, really good. Like Like,
$20 a month sounds pretty cheap.
oh yeah, and that's for the GPT-4. Now, if you want to get super advanced when you're asking about those PDFs, Scholar AI has a cost above that to use those features. Once again, if you're doing a ton of research and stuff, totally worth it. Like to me, that's just built into my tuition and fees at this point because I use it all the time. So we're going to use 3.5, which is the free one for the purposes of this class. And that's a real rough ChatGPT. If you guys go out and YouTube, there's like tons of videos of tips and tricks. But if you've never used it before, it's all about how you question and form your prompt that you're giving it, right? So you have to give it context. You have to set the environment, talk to it like you would a human, but format what you kind of want to push it to. And the better you get at doing that, the better you'll get the output out of ChatGPT. No questions asked. So we are going to give it that same context just to get us started, right? So we are working on a Flask project in Python. All right. So it now knows what it is. It knows how to code. It knows we're in the context of this now. That's our topic, so to speak. So what we're wanting to do is go back to our Flask, and we already have our project laid out here, right?
Mhm.
And we already have our structure and everything else we need. So let's go back to our Blackboard requirements, which is here. I'm going to zoom this up so you guys can see. So you guys will need to have a minimum of 5 pages using the proper template structure, right? That one's fairly easy to get because even if you are required, like in this case, we have to have a register login system. Well, that's like 2 pages right there, right? You have a register and you have a login kind of setup. You also have at least 1 page that uses a form, which is a proper get and post. It turns out you pretty much have that with the register and login pages, right? But you could do additional ones. It also wants you to set up a SQLite database with a minimum of 2 tables linked to a foreign key. And then we need to use Bootstrap for our web templates, right? And I don't care which one you use, but you should make use of at least a modal as it goes through. So you had a topic for us that we were going to do on this project. What was that?
Check it out.
So we say something like, I am looking to build an app that, or I'm looking to use build an app that uses Flask to what?
Post weekly polls about like NFL games. Let's see, like users' opinions, I guess, on who's gonna win.
Okay. Okay. So if you didn't hear that, what we're looking to do is build an app that uses Flask to host weekly polls about NFL games to gather users' opinions on who's going to win. And then we would say it will need a registration and login system. What else do we need to tell it?
I want it so only an admin or a certain user can post the polls.
Okay. Only the admin or logged in users can post.
I was wanting the modal to be, you like click on the vote button and the modal will pop up with this team or this team. You just click one and the modal will disappear.
Okay, we'll get to that part. So anything else that we think we should give it context in so far?
Could you make it so they can only vote once?
Users should only be allowed to vote once per poll. Is that right?
Yeah.
And what is the poll?
The poll is just, do you think this team will win or this?
Okay, so we can do that. And so we're going to modify this a little bit to host weekly polls about NFL games. It's really about who will win NFL games NFL, let's call it matchups. Yeah, so we kind of had that, but we need to modify it here. So the host weekly polls about who will win in NFL matchups, right? Which means we don't need this part because we kind of had that, but it wasn't the best text. Okay. It will need a login, registration login system. Only the admin or logged in users can post, and users should only be allowed to vote once per poll. Good start. All right. So I hit enter, and you can see just how quickly this is going to flow out everything that we want. Now, the benefit of this is what it's trying to do is set you up a user guide, so to speak, right? Here's step one, here's step two, here's step three. You at least have some structure to help you where to go. And a lot of you guys that are like deer in the headlights right now, trying to figure out what your project is, where do I get started? At least this is going to start giving you some direction on where to go get started. So the first part is set up your Flask project. You need to create a project directory and a virtual directory. We already did that, right? That's knocked out with PyCharm. Install Flask and required libraries. We already have that done because we installed it through PyCharm. It says create the Flask application. Create the main Flask application by creating a Python file, for example, app.py. In this file, set up the Flask app, configure the database, and create the necessary routes. Then for the user registration, they're actually using Flask WTF to do the registration login forms. That is another application that you just install into that program. We want to actually code that for this, right? Because I'm looking for you guys to actually code it. Store user information in the database, blah, 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 admin functionality, etc. So it's going to get you all set up for there. What we need to do is actually have some information on how to build that stuff, right? So we would say on step 3, what would app.py look like?
Sorry, well, can I see when it's done?
Yes.
Did it specifically say like create an app.py or is you just get,
So when I came up here on 3,
I'm following side by side, I'm getting.
no, you're good. On 3, it said create the main Flask app by creating app.py,
Okay.
right? And then it says set that Flask app, configure the database, create the necessary routes, etc. That is what we're asking for help on at this point. So I can provide you a simplified example of what your app.py will be and what it would look like for NFL matchups app. Please note this is a basic starting point and you'll need to expand and customize it, right? So it's never going to just say, here's your app, walk away. You have to keep moving with it. But as you keep doing this, it's keeping a model and a history of what you're doing, and it gets smarter and smarter as you go here. It's trying to tailor it for what you want. So if we look at this initial code, we're just going to hit copy code. We'll come out here into our demo. Let's go to our app.py, which we have, and hit Control V. All right, let's scroll to the top. We have Flask Alchemy and we have Flask Login. Now, we don't want to necessarily use SQL Alchemy and Login, right? What those are is SQL Alchemy is a lot like Django in that it's a middleman so that you don't have to write SQL code from scratch. We don't know how to use that, right? That's not within the confines of this. So let's go back to ChatGPT and say, I am not allowed to use SQL Alchemy. Need to create the database by hand using SQL Lite 3. And then I will need to write my own register and login system like that, right? And so what it's going to do now is go back and tweak that and say, okay, we'll just write our own code and make all that set up. It's great. It's what we want. So we'll let it spit it out here. Now, what's nice about this, at the very bottom of all the code, and it's usually pretty good about giving you some solid comments inside of there. So we're going to dump that into here. There we go. So notice in that SQL Atomy, we had things like class user, and that's going to look a lot like Django, and that's not what we're doing here yet, right? So what we want to do is look in here, and we have Flask login. We can go ahead and trash. We can leave that alone for now. We have our secret key. That's fine. Okay, create and configure the SQLite database. Well, how did we do that in our own example that we did before? Does anybody remember?
We had to go through like define all the fields that we wanted and add, like we had to write the SQL, didn't we?
We did, but how did we end up doing that? Does anybody remember? It wasn't in app.py, it was in
In the schema file.
Yep, we had that stuff in a schema file, and we also had a db.py that did all that connecting for us. So let's go back here and say, can you create a db.py file to handle all of the database commands? I need the SQL schema to be in its own file too. There you go. So you don't get frustrated, right, with what you're doing. Like, it'll give you stuff, but tweak it to what you wanted to do for this homework assignment. And in this homework assignment, we needed a db.py and we needed a SQL schema file. It literally gives us that, which is great because this may be right for what you want, but maybe you want extra features in here than what this thing's asking. And that is what we would add in by ourselves. So that's why I'm not mad with you using this, because it's just giving you a template. You have to tell it what to do and go through all the work. So let's copy this code out for our SQL schema file. Come in here, we right click, and we'll do a new. And let's just do file. Pretty sure it was a, what was it called? SQL. I gotta go back.
Is there a way,
SQL schema.sql.
is there a way to open multiple PyCharm projects next to each other?
Mhm.
Like if I wanted to be referencing back to our example back and forth.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
You just go to file open,
Okay.
open your project. It'll ask, do you want it in this window or a new window? And then say new window, and it has two different pie charts open then.
Okay.
Yep.
Perfect.
Okay. So now we have our nice SEMA SQL file. We're going to go ahead and dump that in. And that looks like it took it correct. At the top, we can say use SQLite. So that knows that our dialect is formed correctly for SQLite. That looks good. And no data sources are configured to run this SQL, provide that advanced code assistance. We don't need that at this point. All right. So we can save that file. And then if we go back to our ChatGPT, we can see that it created a nice db.py for us. And that is going to match up more of what we did within our template that we built out. So we go into our demo, new Python file db.py, and paste that in. Okay. Now we have to format this a little bit to make sure it matches up with what PyCharm likes, aka 2 spaces. That all looks good. And then from here, we're importing SQLite 3, initialize the DB, which I think we called it initDB. None of that matters. You don't have to get in the weeds about that matching the beginning. The idea is that this is going to open up whatever we want. So notice this is not polls.db, right? And so to do that, we need to create to this database. We're going to open up our SQL schema, set all of that SQL up, and execute those scripts. So this initialize DB is going to handle us creating our database for us. All right. From down here, we're going to get user. This is the code to go get the user out of there. Should match very, very closely to what we did in the example. And it says if user data, return user as it comes out. Now notice user's not found here, right? It didn't really give us that stuff yet. We're going to have to work on that. Create a user. Here's the code to create a user. And then we can define other database related functions below that, which we can use ChatGPT to keep editing that file as we go. Okay. So for now, that at least gets us started in creating the database. Let's go back here And let's see here, you have this modular approach, and that's a great way of doing it. So if we scroll back up, actually to the end of this one, we created a user class to represent user objects, similar to what Flask login expects. Now we're not using Flask login, so we're not going to be handling it in that way. This is the code we want. It's over here in app, right? Should have a user, get user. No, let's go back. So what we would do is say, what would an updated app.py file look like? Right? Because we shifted all the database stuff off to its own file. It should give us an updated version of what that would look like now. There we go. Now we got our user stuff. So there we go. We can copy code, come back, app.py AB. And so if we look at this one, we now have this new app called Flask Login. So we're going to create a separate app that handles just login stuff. We have a DB, and that allows us to get our user, create our user. So you can see where it's just a continuously morphing until we get it to the right spot. They created this class user login that allows us to store all that information, and we can pass that user object between different pages and things like that that we may need. So I'm adding some enters in here to get rid of some of that annoying PyCharm stuff that looks for PEP8 compliance. Okay, so there's a couple things that it did create here for us. It created our login page for us. Notice it has the get and post, and it has the correct format and syntax that we used in our example in terms of the post and go get this stuff and log it in. Has the flash message all set up for us too, and our logout page there. All right. Now, you'll notice we're missing this whole Flask login up above. Anybody have an idea what that is? Yeah, neither do I. So let's go find out. All right. What is Flask underscore login? Okay. So if we look in here, it is something it wanted us to install to handle all of the user sessions and flag. It's a third-party module. And in this case, we don't want to use that third-party module because you guys need to decode that from scratch. So I cannot use that in my project. I need to write a basic registration and login system. There we go. Now we're closer to what we would expect. Okay, so let's go look at what that code did. Now this one, you'll notice this is our app.py kind of thing. This is creating the tables and the system that goes in here. So let's make sure here. Notice how it brought the DB stuff back into app, right? So we got to tell it to spit that stuff out. So could you move the DB py? Could you move the database content to db.py like before? And it'll say, I apologize for the oversight, blah, 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 blah. Or at least 4.0, that's what it tends to do. Okay. We're getting closer. This is the reason I wanted to record it in this fashion, so you guys see that this is a constantly evolving thing as you go through. So here is our new db.py, and that should handle the context that we want. Let's go back to our db.py, and let's overwrite that with our new stuff. That all looks good. It's actually probably very close. And in our app, let's take what it says to use for app. Okay, and let's give this the spacing it needs. Whoops. Okay, and if we look at the top, we no longer have those fancy things before. So in theory, if we were to run this as is, let's go ahead and click the run. We should get our website, which now has a homepage. If we go to whack login, we have an internal server error, probably don't have any templates or anything set up, right? We have the routes, but no templates. And we also have a register. Again, internal server error. So if we come down here and look, no templates found. Okay, but we're on the right path of what we're wanting to do. So let's go back to this one. And you can say that looks great. And if we scroll clear back up to the top, we need to go figure out what our next section is, right? So we now have our Flask app. We have created the user registration and login stuff. That's all there. Before we go further and start adding our admin functionality and all that kind of stuff, let's just make sure our login stuff works first, right? What would an example HTML template look like for, and then we have our 3 pages, right? Register, login, and log out. For register, okay. And again, this is just giving us a basic example, but let's use that as a template to get started. So does anybody remember where we put those template files?
There's a folder called templates somewhere.
So the difference is, if you remember in Flaskar, we created blueprints, right? And so we could tell this thing to put all the registration in a blueprint, which would probably be a smart idea to compartmentalize it. For simplicity's sake, I'm not going to demo that here. We're just going to right click in templates, new HTML file. This will be register. And inside register, we're going to control A and V. And one thing that we would want to do is come down here and say, let's do this way. What would an example look like for register? What would an example look like for register, comma, login, comma, log out with a base.html template. And is it, remember why I did that? So if I tell it just to create a register, a login, and a logout, it's going to create individual HTML files. But if you remember, we wanted to extend off a base HTML so that we just have a basic HTML and every page we create after that is extended off that. That kind of makes sense. So log out with, let's do this, extending from a base HTML file. So let's see what it generates off that. There we go. Now we're more after what we want. So it's all about shaping those prompts. You guys have never played with it and done that kind of thing. Again, you just keep working it. But I tell you what, to be honest, this is the way of the future. That's the way things will work. They're building this kind of stuff into all sorts of tools these days.
Yeah.
So use it to your advantage. It doesn't replace you as a coder. People get worried. Oh, it's going to replace me. No, it doesn't. It doesn't know what's in your head as to what you want, right? It can only do what it's told, and it sometimes needs to be told better, right? That's what we're seeing here. So let's steal our base HTML code. Let's create that template, new HTML base. There we go. That created some sections for us. So notice we have a head and then we have a block title here. So we can always insert a title there. We have your app title here. We're probably going to want something else, right? So this would be something like dash NFL games, right? Depending on what we're at. And we can tweak all that. As a matter of fact, we're going to edit these pages, so I'm not going to get carried away. Body. Notice we have a content section, and then if we wanted to have a footer, we could split all that in. Register is going to take advantage of that and specifically override things like user registration, etc. So that all looks good. Grabs in our register and login. Let's go back and grab our register code because that should be extended now. Notice the difference is now it extends off base HTML and inserts it into blocks. So this is a true templating language, in this case, Jenga. So now we have register. Let's go grab the code for login. HTML, login, Control AV. Again, puts it in the blocks. And here's our login code. Like that's what I just put in there, wasn't it? Okay. And the last one is our logout code. HTML. Okay. So this all looks good. We now at least have templates. We know that if we restart our server, it should automatically pull all of our changes. So let's go out here. Let's go out and go to our main site. There we go. And do a / register. And now we got to use a registration page, right? We have a login. Generated that for us. We don't know it, go to register, clicks us over, already have an account login. So it automatically built the stuff that we would want to see on those pages in there. And then if we go to logout, it would kick us back to the home page, right? And if we looked at the code underneath the hood, it would be doing exactly what we wanted it to do there. Now, as we saw, that's like the most basic code, right? It's just white page, everything else. So we could come in here and say, do you know how to use Bootstrap 5? There you go. It tells us how to use grid systems, how to do all that stuff. Great. It's giving us great information about Bootstrap. Can you rewrite login, logout, register, and the index page to use Bootstrap? Oh, and actually, let's do this. Index and base page to use Bootstrap 5 to make it look better. And it will do just that, right? So let's look at what it ends up generating, and then we can go in and actually look at the code and see what it looks like or how it started with HTML5. It at least gets you a template, then you can go tweak to your heart's content and do everything else. The whole point of this session is so that you guys end up with a template, and then you can go tweak it and make it look like what you want it to look like. Okay. So, because eventually the whole point is we're going to get to your modal that you wanted it to do. So let's go to our base, and now we're just going to update each one of these codes. That takes no time at all. Just close these out here real quick. All right, so in our base, let's update that code, save it. Down here, grab our login code. Grab our register code. And our logout code. Like that. Okay. So if we go to our app.py, you remember that this home is just returning the word homepage. So we don't even have a homepage at this point, right? We'll get there. We'll have it create a template for us so that we actually have an index.html hosted for that. But for now, if we just come in here, go to our website, refresh, now go to /register. Did I not do that right? Should stop and start. I had it cached. I don't know that made that better or worse. So first of all, let's go look at our base. It dumped in the right JavaScript code. It pulled out the right CSS. And our custom CSS, which we're not using right now. Let's see, we got a 200. Obviously, it lost the custom CSS part. Let's go look at this code here. Okay, in these templates, I've used Bootstrap 5 classes and components. I've also included a Bootstrap utility like Justify Content Center, MT4. Remember to link your custom CSS styles as well, as shown in the link tag in the basic HTML. Can you give me the custom.css file? And I'm guessing that's what we're missing is all the CSS that we did customized. All right, so we already have that code for the base. Just copy that. So for the CSS, we need to put that in our project static folder, right? So let's come out here. We have a static folder, new file, CSS style sheet, and this is called custom. And we paste that in. Now, if we hold shift and refresh this page, we at least see some blue there, but it still doesn't look like it's working right. So let's right click, view page source. It's not what I want. Right click, inspect. And let's go to the console. And let's refresh this page. So refresh. And if we look at the console, what do we get here? That did not work. So what happened is it tried to go get these files and it's not finding those files. So if we go out to Bootstrap and go to 5, and the newer files are Bootstrap 532. If you'll notice in here, it was trying to use Bootstrap 5.5. All right. So I don't know where it thought it was getting 5.5 from. But so like I said, it will lie if it doesn't know. Yeah. Right. So what we need to do is go to 5.3. And we need to say and of course I'm using the free version, right? So it cannot access websites, it cannot access any of that code. Let's tell it to what I want to do here. Give me a second. There we go. There's our link. And which one's this? The link in the JavaScript. So let's go back to our Flask and say those Bootstrap links do not work. Please use the following. And if you don't know, you hold shift and press enter. That'll let you enter down without actually hitting enter, by the way. So we can hit paste and paste that in and then shift enter a couple times and add our script one in. So let's do that. Paste those in. And update base.html. Go. Now, obviously, we could have went in and did it by hand, but what's the problem if we go do it by hand?
It wouldn't be updated.
ChatGPT wouldn't know. So if you tell it to rewrite that page, the next time you copy and paste, everything's broke. I've learned that lesson. So you want to do it, but you want to make sure that the model still has what it is. Now, you can copy and paste your code in here and say, this is my latest file. That way it works from that. I've used that way as doing it too. But you got to make sure you're keeping things the same between the two. So we go here, we paste it. Let's go ahead and hit stop. Restart. Go to our page, close that. Let's go to our user one, shift, refresh. And now we got a nice fancy looking page. Now, I don't like blue. Okay, I go in and change my CSS, or it says your app up here. Okay, I need to go fix all that. But we have templates now to start running with, and it doesn't look like a basic page. It's really super simple. Click on login. We now have a nice login page. We have register, login, and log out. Notice how it automatically created a nav bar for us up at the top to make it look nice and pretty too. All right, so we're at least getting started as to what we needed. Let's go back to our Blackboard and see if we at least got some of these knocked out. So you need to have at least 5 pages. We have how many so far? 3, right? And kind of a quasi index, but we need to create a nice landing page for that. You have at least 1 page that utilizes a form, which we have that now. We have the proper routes. We need to use Bootstrap and we need to use a modal, right? So the only piece of this whole thing we haven't built is the whole section about the polls, right? We haven't done any of the poll work yet. So let's go back. I know we have only so much time left here. So let's go clear back up to the top. So we have our login system that appears to be working. We can set that. Actually, let's try it, make sure everything works like we intended. So register. And on our user registration, JL Zeller, password 12345, register, internal server error. All right. Down here, cursor execute, no such table as users, right? So why didn't this work?
Is it just one of those scheme tables is named like user, it's the users?
Well, if we go and look at our users DB, if we actually looked into it, we would see there's nothing in there. So why is that? Does anybody remember what we didn't do in Flask yet? We created the schema file. We have the database file that tells us how to build this out, create user
Initialize.
table.
You have to initiate.
Right, we got to initiate the database, right? So we'll also notice in DB .py, there's nothing to create that schema file anymore. So at some point, it lost that code for us as well. So we need to go back and get those two meshed up. So let's go look at our schema. Say back in this. Okay, now we can say you gave me this schema file below. Please give an updated db.py that has the init db content. Enter, dun, 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 paste. Okay, so now we've got an updated DB file that actually has all the stuff we needed. Let's go back. My point to illustrate there was this is going to get messy over time, so you got to keep it in line, right? It wants to generate new code and sometimes forgets what it already told you. Okay, so this wants us to use your database name.db. Well, we're going to call that users.db. All right, here's our schema SQL file. That looks good. This should be users as well. Check credentials. This should be users as well. Okay, that looks good. Let's go ahead and trash this DB file. Has 3 usages. Yeah, that's fine. Delete it anyway. I can't delete it because it's being used. So stop this. Then we delete that because we want it to recreate. Okay. Now, does anybody remember the command to initialize our database? Should actually be in our app file. There we go. Create user table, etc. We go to DB. We actually need to get an updated one. Updated code for app.py that uses that db.py file. What I'm looking for at the bottom is when it actually does the initialization of the database. There, right there. Okay, that looks much better. No, wrong file. That should be app. There we go. Okay, now let's try running that. It's good. Let's go out to the website. Let's go to WAC register. Let's try to register. There we go. Now our registration is working right because everything's linked together in the back end like we would expect. So now we're at the login. Let's do a JL Zeller 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and we're at the home page and we're logged in. All right. So if we go back out here, we look at our registers here. We have our login. Notice on our logout, we don't have the decorators that say you must be logged in to go to the log. You know what I mean? Things like that. But we at least have the basics to get us started. So you can keep hammering through ChatGPT and have it help you build the rest of your project out. So I know some of you guys were struggling getting started on this one in less than, an hour here. We at least have pretty solid templates to keep moving along with. The key in ChatGPT is to not delete your chat thread. So over here, there's usually a list of all your chat threads. I'm not going to show mine because I got a lot in there. But if you click on that and pull that up, then you can save that thread. And this thread is always saved. So just keep going back to this thread. And that way, if you start a new one, it starts the whole thing over again, right? So keep reusing that as much as possible. Some other big benefits between 3, 5, and 4 is when we go to dump our code in, you're capped at how much you can actually paste into ChatGPT. So if you go to 4, you can dump in way more text when you go in there. But yeah, so right now that's all working. The next section is your polls. And so you could say, how would I add the polls functionality into the program? And then it's going to tell you all the stuff that we need to do about polls and which files you would update in order to get those polls and do all that, right? So here's all the routes for creating polls, listing polls, all of our templates we need to update. Then, just stop there, right? You tell it to go back to 1 and say, okay, what would an updated schema file look like? Instead of you trying to copy and paste this stuff in, tell me what the updated one should look like. And it should continuously keep updating those files for you. What do you guys think? Is it better, or would you rather just code it from scratch?
I think it's just
Better.
it is nice to be able to have chat write it. It's just a matter of like, what do I need to ask?
Yeah.
It's about what you need to ask. And also when you run into an error, you still have to be somewhat familiar with everything in order to know how to troubleshoot it, right? Like earlier, I was like, why isn't that? Oh, it's because the user database isn't being connected. But don't just run this and then start hitting copy code. Read this text below, because ChatGPT does a really good job of explaining this. And if you don't think it's good enough, say, explain this as a beginner, right? So you could come back here and say, can you explain db.py as if I am a beginning student in Python?
Takes advanced Python.
What it's going to end up doing is breaking down each chunk of the entire script, right? It's this massive db.py, right? That's this here. And if you don't understand what is this code doing for register user, you come out here and it will tell you exactly what it's doing in that piece and bringing that through. So like here, register user, etc., and it will break that out. So use that text to your advantage. And if you don't remember, copy and paste that in as a comment into your code, because then you'll have something to refer back to without having to dig through this log to figure out where it was at. Another thing that I've used before in here is like, let's see here. If you got an error up here like we did before, you can copy and paste this error and say, it's giving me this error. And it will go back and try to reanalyze the files that it's already built out and say, oh, we made a mistake. You are missing this. And then it redoes that file. Use it to your advantage. So I wish we had more time to go a little bit further. I'll stop the recording so that you guys can actually go back and reference this. But I'm not opposed to you using this kind of stuff in your projects, right? You can tell already it's just not going to code it for you.
Yeah.
But you having a helper go through it. And a lot of times, because we're getting so faster at Flask, and especially when we're using Django, use this tool as a helper, right? I'm gonna still be here to answer questions, but when it's 2 a.m. in the morning and you want help now, use ChatGPT. And I'm not telling you need to go buy the premium version, but the premium version will help you even better than what this one will. So it's up to you as you're going through. If you're coding other projects, especially for your final project, and you feel like you're getting stuck in places, it may be worth the extra dough to get through that midterm project. That's up to you, or the final project. Especially when you can use that plus the advanced code interpreter that's specifically designed to interpret code like this. So you're going to get way more benefits out of it. Plus, it's using the updated model, so things like Bootstrap 5.5 that doesn't even exist, that wouldn't happen in there. There's even plugins that you can tell it to go to actually web pages. So I could have just pointed it to the documentation for 5.5 and told it to build out something like that. So if I come over here and look at this, of course, it's at the very top now, or I do a new chat. Yeah, I'd have to start a new chat and then I could tell it to go from there. All right, I'm gonna stop that recording.